Uh, all right, I just gotta change this setting. Sorry.
Hmm.
Da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay.
We can hear you if that helps.
Oh yeah, no, y'all could hear me, but there was this setting on the streaming software and the internet can't hear me. But now they can hear
Uh,
me. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll get started on the agenda. There's kind of a mishmash of stuff today. The first one was the Constantinople Ropsten fork and how that went, and then the status of the Constantinople hard fork that's happening in less than 2 weeks. Roughly, yeah, roughly 2 weeks or 13 days from now. So, anyone want to go over the particulars of that? Did anyone follow the Ropsten fork? Because I wasn't online much that day.
Well, I can't say I followed it, but from what I heard, it went over well. The only thing that would concern me if there was consensus issues, if there are only issues with like small amounts of miners and stuff like that, then that's just adds spice and it's a bit interesting. But it went well as far as I know.
Great. Any other comments on the Ropsten part of the fork? And I talked to Igor from POA Network last night, and he said that the POA Network has done their Petersburg fork or whatever to revert the Constantinople effects. So that's one test net that's gone through that. And then I don't know about any of the other test nets. Anyone have any to speak up on? I don't think Gurley had this problem.
Yeah, Gurley just was in this fortunate situation that it could launch with Petersburg block 0. Coven enabled Petersburg. We had some issues with authorities not upgrading, so we had 2 chains. But also we had the same problem on Robson, as far as I remember. We had miners on the one chain. It was quite annoying, but other than that, I don't think there were any problems discovered.
Okay, sounds good. And then the Constantinople fork coming up in 2 weeks. I know that the plan is for the cat herders to start reaching out to miners probably a week out. We're also going to be posting a Reddit and sticking a Reddit thread, doing some Twitter reach out to people to let them know what's going on, and I'll do a blog post for the Ethereum.org blog. And so that's what I plan on doing. Does anyone else think there's more that we need to do other than just trying to let people know to update? Is there any other like client side stuff we need to work on?
Yeah, I'm going to update the fork1.eastdevops.io with some better information.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Is the fork monitor still running strong?
Like currently, is it running?
What was
Yeah,
the question?
is it running or will it be running? Somebody's got that.
Sorry, I didn't catch what the question was.
The fork monitor website, is that still up and running? And
Yes, so yeah, that's the one I just talked about. So it is still
okay.
running, but it has stale information, and I need to update a couple of the clients.
Okay, sounds good. Then I think we're all good on Constantinople. So today, Jason and Carver and Jeff Coleman wanted to talk about the side effects of Create 2. There was recently some articles put out and some other misinformation in the community that there was a bug found in Constantinople and then it would be delayed. That was because there was an augur, I guess, what do they call those? Prediction market to say that there's going to be a Constantinople delay and that delay would be um, like after the 28th or like after the 27th or something like that. And the cool thing about that is because the block time is going to be variable between now and then, there's not really a good way to know until it gets closer, and it gets more accurate as it gets closer. So that's kind of the reason for that's kind of a tricky prediction market, but it's not to say that there's a delay because of a bug. So people got like nervous because of that. So, but there are some, I guess, things that people didn't realize were going to happen because of Create 2. So we'll start with Jason and then have Jeff come in to kind of give both of their perspectives, and then we'll have other people respond. So Jason, you can start.
Sure. So, I don't think I need to kind of go over the issue itself. Just this idea that Create 2 allows contracts to be redeployed after self-destruct, and with a little bit of trickiness can redeploy different bytecode. I think this was basically known by the EAP authors, but maybe some of the things that makes tricky about auditability weren't fully fleshed out to the point of writing up articles and making it well known to the community. So most of the people that I talked to in person, quite a lot of people online, just didn't know this was coming. And frankly, their first reaction is surprise and the idea that it's going to be sort of more difficult to think about how contracts work. It's definitely something that you can learn your way around, but it's not well known right now. So I think there's really only two options that make sense, and the one that makes the most sense is we just have to educate people a lot and quickly. My instinct would be to remove it, but I also know that and do a small fix. But I know that we're way up against the deadline here, and there's a lot of practical things stopping us from doing
that. Okay, Jeff, did you have comments?
Yeah, I think Jason has a really good point that I think there's some education and awareness that we need to build around this. I think a lot of people are not familiar with kind of the whole thing, like why do you even need to Create 2? I've seen comments like, oh, you can't do anything with Create 2 that you can do with Create whatever. And I think we definitely need to do a better job of communicating that. I've been trying to get some more information out on Twitter and Reddit and things like that, and I might do a longer write-up as well. I think especially Jason's done a good job of emphasizing some of the more counterintuitive things around self-destruct. And I think having a really clear messaging to people of both the simple way from a source code review perspective that you make sure there aren't any weird gotchas in this. And I think that can basically be broken down to two components. One, when we look forward to how we're going to be handling state and storage and all that, I think there's a very good case to be made to say that nobody should be using self-destructs right now. I know there's a couple of edge cases where people like to use them. But when we look forward to most of the strategies that we're looking at for how we're going to be handling storage rent and the later proposals for stashing and retrieval of storage, I think those are a much stronger and more general way to handle storage costs. And so for a long time, I know a lot of people have already been recommending not to use self-destructs, and this is a much stronger reason. And then the second part is emphasizing that init codes are really important. So I guess one of the things that is counterintuitive about Create 2 is that theoretically redeployments can change the contract bytecode because the address is only a commitment to the init code and a not. And I think definitely people need to be aware that init codes are part of auditing, and you need to be paying attention to init codes, and that non-deterministic init codes are a problem, and that any vectors in your init codes are just as much an issue for understanding the identity of a contract as any kind of thing that you might have where there's like some delegate call or something inside of a contract where that's a property that someone can use to change things. And so like that's already extremely important with looking at factory paradigms and figuring out what something is. So I think like those two messages are something I'm going to work really hard to get out there. And I think there on the question of whether there could be something pulled back about this, like not only is this pretty late in the game, I think there is a really big question here for me as to given the sort of niche impact of this, and given that I don't think people who are writing contracts and looking to make them like auditable are really impacted by this. Like, just don't use self-destruct. It's a pretty simple way to never run afoul of this. But if you are looking at someone else's code and trying to understand, like there are these weird phenomena that Jason has noted, especially when you combine create 2 and create 1, because create 1 has this really weak assumption around address identity that it's just whatever the nonce is, and you do wipe out the nonce when you self-destruct a contract, which means that we're losing that data. And so the only solutions that I can see to stop that from happening are to keep this extra data around in the state tree. And going forward, I think that's a really bad idea. There are a lot of ways this assumption is going to continue to break down when we look at both looking at the storage rent proposals of how we might be stashing and retrieving storage, and looking into things like yanking up contracts, looking into things like the generalization of account abstraction. All these sorts of things are going to be changing a lot of these assumptions. And so when we look forward to where we want to end up, I think the end place that it would be amazing to get to on this would be to have all addresses be commitments to the contract identity via the init code. Basically, we need content-based addressing of contracts and not just order-based addressing, which is what create 1 is. So if we get to the place where create 2 is standard, everyone's using create 2, get rid of self-destructs, like just stop using them entirely. And then have that be the new paradigm that everyone's working inside of. I think that's a fantastic place for us all to get to. And then basically we can throw out this idea of a contract nonce. So obviously looking toward that sort of a thing as a place that we can get to. I think that having create 2 in its current form is the best we can do. I haven't heard any really great proposals. I think the only sort of patchy thing that can even be considered for this is keeping a whole bunch of extra information around the state tree every time we delete a contract, and that really doesn't make a lot of sense going forward, I don't think. So those are kind of my thoughts on it.
Cool. Do other people have comments on that?
I think the one thing that we need to keep in mind is more for the future, which is when we start thinking about rent and start thinking about deletion, then that's a way that contracts can go from being in the state to being not in the state without a self-destruct operation. And so we would need to be careful to either just disallow, like basically require creating a contract at that point to have Merkle proofs, or base proving that it didn't exist before, or some other scheme that prevents contracts from like basically just being popped into existence with new code if that's not the way that they were intended to be set up. But that's not something that we need to figure out in the next couple of weeks or anything like that. But it's still useful to keep in mind, especially since we're trying to get the the ETH2 sharding phase 2 of VM spec started very soon.
Yeah, I have a comment as well. So this whole discussion basically started 2 years ago when we talked about these side effects on the first eve for Create 2. And what we really should do, in my opinion, is to take, when these discussion happens, wherever they happen, we put them in a condensed form on like security considerations. What are the possible side effects and consequences of an EAP? And we try to update that. Even if an EAP has been finalized, we could still update that particular section with newly found discussion information. Because if the information is spread out over EAP discussions and fellowship discussions, it might be hard to find. And I guess that's the reason why this has been kind of refound again and again by different people. So that's, yeah, would be great if we can start doing that.
That's a great idea. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks, Jason and Jeff, for that. We'll move on to the ProgPow audit. So the cat herders and related parties have been looking at doing the ProgPow audit. We are, here's the latest on that, just in a couple of minutes. We have found a company who has sent us a proposal to do a series of benchmark testing. I know some of the sticking point for some people in the space was that it was not clear if AMD or NVIDIA cards would be getting a performance boost unfairly based on ProgPow being implemented. And so this benchmarking would basically have some unbiased scientific benchmarking across different video cards to make sure that ProgPow works the same or similarly across all of them. And so we found that that's an easier thing to do. The problem that we're having is that we're having trouble finding an auditor or a company or group to look at ProgPow and say things like, this is how long it would take a ProgPow ASIC to be created, here's the things that people would have to do, here's the budget they would have to have, some other stuff that we're interested in order for the community to try to make this decision on whether or not to go forward with it. So we're having trouble finding those auditors. If you know of people, companies, stuff like that who'd be interested in this, send them my way. And we are talking to a few people, so it's not completely a lost cause, but it's not looking very great in finding those people, primarily because the people who are the most expert at this stuff have conflicts of interest because they're looking into ProgPow mining themselves, whether that be GPU or ASIC. So yeah, it's kind of complicated, but my hope is that we will find someone in the next few weeks to then get started on an audit to be completed as soon as possible. Any comments? Okay, great. So the next item, Pavel commented that he wants to reject EIP 135, the ET hash 1A EIP that does just a slight tweak to make ET hash break the current ASICs. I think he's the author of that, and I think he just wants to reject it because he's the author of it and it's not going to be useful anymore now that we're looking into other things like ProgPow. So he's not here to really talk about it, so we can skip that item. And I don't think there needs to be permission for someone to reject their own EIP, and someone else can resurrect it as a different EIP if that's the case.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. The Istanbul hard fork roadmap. Offrey, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, not much changed since we discussed this last month. The only thing is what we have to discuss briefly. Shall we are all subsequent hard forks delayed by 1 month now that we moved to Constantinople, or shall we just proceed with the initial timeline? What makes sense here?
I say proceed.
I think we should just proceed with it.
Yeah, I tend to suggest that also.
I also saw on there was the hard fork naming challenge. Was that the thing on Reddit that people were like putting a bunch of names in to see which ones might be good for a hard fork name?
Thanks for bringing this up. I almost forgot about it. Unfortunately, we didn't reach the necessary quorum of 10 million donuts, so this poll is void.
Okay. Sounds good. And then you also have on here EIP 1418 state rent. Is that Alexi's thing? Oh, I think you're muted.
No. Someone else. Let me look it up for a second.
Sure.
That is William. I don't know if he's around.
Oh, William and Triken? Or a different William?
Yes.
Looks like he's online. Do you want to join the call to talk about that, or is that something he's involved in? I haven't read that EIP. Let me check it real quick.
Well, if he's not around, then we don't have to. He put it on the agenda, and
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, sorry, I didn't see his comment at all. Requesting to add the agenda in the scope. I believe the main speaker is Alexi. Okay, yeah, Alexi is not here, and so because of that, we'll skip this item for now until Alexi can come on. I know he came out the other day with version 3 of the state fees proposal, which I haven't had a chance to look over, but he's iterating on that. So just a second. I'm just telling William, because unless William wants to speak on it, here, so we will skip the item today. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll just skip the item, because Alexi's not here to speak on it, and he's the authority on it. I think that's it for the hard fork roadmap for Istanbul. And then the next item is Outlook proof of stake finality gadget on the proof of work chain for Serenity. That's been on here for a few weeks, and I forgot who put it on here and why. Does anyone remember?
I don't remember who put it on, but it's something that the community definitely is interested in. And again, I'm interpreting this as utilizing the beacon chain, which is phase 0 of ETH2O, to finalize the proof of work chain. To be clear, the main technical challenge in doing that is creating a viable light client for the beacon chain, which is something that we are actively pursuing with a couple of the clients. So this is very technically feasible and seems very much like it's something that the community wants. So our intention is to continue putting the pieces in place that would allow us to do that. That's the main update right now, though.
Cool. Anybody else have comments on that? All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would say not just generally not much to kind of worry about from a developer development standpoint at this point. The one thing that we are like, there's two in terms of implementation. Eventually, there's two possibilities, which is that could be conceivably used for this sort of thing. Where one of them is that we make a ETH2 light client inside of ETH1, and the other is that we basically require ETH1 clients to all be also ETH2 light clients. So basically kind of mandate some form of merge mining. So So that's, I mean, I'm definitely, I think it would definitely be nice if we can just make an ETH2 Litecoin to put it inside of ETH1, but if not, then the other kind of option could be a possibility.
You're talking about actually embedding in a contract?
So basically, I'm talking like one approach is the approach that doesn't really change the ETH1 consensus rules, and the other approach is the approach that does. Right, so like,
I'm not sure if I'm 100% following the one that doesn't change the consensus rules.
oh, this is the one that basically just sticks an ETH2 Lite client inside of a contract in ETH1, if that ends up being possible.
Right, would require some succinct form of verification, right? This would require snarks likely.
Yeah.
To efficiently do. Because there's a lot
of, I mean,
the nice client, there's still a lot of signatures.
Yeah. I'm in the process of writing up this Lite client syncing doc. It'll probably take a couple of days, but the one good thing is that the interface is fairly clean, which is a 32-byte state, which is just the latest known hash, and a pure function verifies a certificate for updating it. So theoretically, like once that pure function is done, then you can shove it into one of these snark tools and see how feasible it ends up.
Right, but then I guess it becomes anytime you update the transition function on 2.0, you'd have to update this contract.
Not well. It depends what kind of update, because this isn't going to be verifying the entire transition function. It's just verifying a bunch of Merkle proofs.
Right. Okay. Okay. Cool.
All right. Any other comments?
One actually thing that's kind of relevant to this is that these Litecoin certificates could potentially be kind of fairly big in size. So like think up to something like 500 kilobytes every 9 days. So in an absolute sense, pretty small, very, very small in terms of load, but in a burst sense, that's still about 10 times bigger than the current block size limit. So this is one of the reasons to maybe potentially think about some of the stuff we thought about in terms of call data gas costs in the ETH1X discussions.
Given that if you went with the contract route, you are still changing the consensus rules in that you now have this privileged contract that people are watching, and so in that you could have an exception for the state transition that involves this payload to the contract.
Well, actually, I'm not sure it requires that much privilege. Like the only privilege that this contract would require is basically the right to withdraw from the deposit contract if we want to do it. End up wanting to make ETH2A, and if we don't end up doing that,
then that the consensus rules would look at it and defer the fork choice route to it.
Well, technically, we don't even need that, as long if we're willing to take the risk of assuming that neither system will get 51% attacked.
Fair. I think okay, right. So I think we're talking about two different things. One is the finality gadget, and one is bringing the state root in, and they're very similar,
right.
But they have two different goals.
The finality gadget
is to finalize and
produce. Yeah, the finality gadget definitely. Yeah, the purpose of the finality gadget is to make the ETH1 chain be dependent on the ETH2 fork choice, which would require privilege, and like realistically Yeah, because that's the whole point of what it does. And if we're going to use that as an excuse to cut block rewards by another factor of 3, then like we are assuming a higher risk of failure on the proof of work side, which we're like basically saying doesn't matter as much because you can't revert finalized blocks anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I think in a stepwise way, like that's the most achievable early, and then adding the state root stuff is like the next step in my opinion. But both seem pretty technically feasible, and we have a couple different paths we're pursuing.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions regarding that before we move on?
Okay, cool. The next topic is the working group updates. So Alexi's not here, so we were not going to do the state fees. We already talked about the Stanford meetings overview. I don't know. I think we left that on for some reason. Unless anyone else had anything to say about that. Do we have anybody else from a working group that has any relevant updates since the last time? I wouldn't expect there to be any. I do know that the simulation team has been working on stuff, but they are flying into Denver this morning, so they're not on the call. And then I know Boris asked in a comment down here, should there be a cadence for in-person meetings, and what would that look like, and do we want to meet up in person regularly or things like that? What are people's thoughts on meeting up in person? We'll probably reapproach this later after we get through some of the working group stuff in future meetings, but does anyone have an appetite for meeting in person?
Is this going a ETH1X themed thing? Is it a core dev themed thing? Is it a everything themed thing?
1X themed or core dev themed, either one. That was kind of Boris's question, at least.
I'd like that. Most of you are obscure avatars and tags that may or may not have anything to do with your name.
Yep, that is true. Okay, anybody else? That's fine if there's no, like, heavy opinions today since this was just brought up, but maybe someone will try to organize one in the future, and that'll be cool. Okay, now we're on testing updates. If we could have Dimitri and then Martin go over that. Dimitri, go right ahead.
Hi guys. So if Martin has no major issues with client passing the test, I think it's okay because all the tests are updated for a couple of weeks now, and Hive is updated, and it's everything being run on different clients. So the Trinity client has raised an issue of creating this general Genesis scheme for clients to initialize the Genesis. And there is a function on RPC protocol, and the test RPC protocol itself is about to be discussed for implementation. Philip Piper Merrill decided to go that direction, implementing the test RPC methods, and detach the testing logic from CPP client as well. So I guess in that direction, it's been like half of a year already. Retested development continue, and after the hard fork, I think we will move and detach this logic from CPP client. That was a test update.
Yeah, and for fuzzing, Parity recently fixed a ticket which had been kind of blocking, and now the fuzzers are running again. That's it.
Great. Now we'll go to client updates. We'll start with Geth. I think I'm going to hit back with Martin again.
Oh, Peter isn't here. Yeah, we don't have much to update. We just had a big team meeting, and we will be launching a new 1.8 a backport with some fixes in the next few days.
Okay. Parity Ethereum.
Yeah, we just had 2 subsequent security releases. So I would advise everyone running Parity clients to upgrade. We noticed today that the severity of the latest security issue is higher than we initially expected it to be. So yeah, it's quite bad. So yeah, that's it from Parity Zone.
Okay. Aleth, is anyone from Aleth here that can talk? Okay. Trinity? I think that'd be Jason.
Yeah, sure. No major updates, just continuing to pull, working on sync and pull pieces out into their own processes. That's about it.
Ethereum JS? Okay. Harmony?
There are no major updates from us. Mostly worked on ETH 2.0.
Great. Pantheon?
Yeah, we're working towards our 1.0 release, implementing FastSync right now. We should have a release candidate next week if anyone wants to play with it, and an official release about 2 weeks from now.
Which FastSync protocol are you using?
I think we're doing the same thing as Get, similar, but Dano might be able to provide more color there.
Yeah, we're using the one Get is because not enough information's come out about the new hybrid sync. We would love to do it, but a lot of the stuff that we would need for a future hybrid sync is also needed in this fast sync. So it gets us closer to where we need to be to get a better fast sync going on. We wanted something faster than a full sync and a full archival node, which is why we went ahead with it.
Okay.
Yeah, so the future hybrid sync, at least the one that Peter has been proposing, is basically first a leaf sync, and then to fill the blanks, you need to do a fast sync anyway, because fast sync is kind of self-healing the state trie. So that's a good start, even for the next type of sync.
Cool. Thanks for the update, Pantheon. TurboGeth isn't here. Anyone from Nimbus here? Okay, what about Mana? Okay, and Mantis? I still haven't been able to reach out to Mantis, but they might eventually show up. Oh, David, you just posted something in chat about a sync up on EIP 1193.
Yeah. So we're planning a call. I haven't scheduled anything yet or even have an agenda for it. But loosely, we just want to talk about the implementation and rollout of EIP 1193, which is only related to JavaScript providers.
Okay, thanks for that. That sounds important.
Yep.
All right. That's all the client updates. Research updates, that'd be Danny and Vitalik.
Sure. I think since the last call, one major piece of news is that this the first release of the phase 0 spec was made, and since then, which basically includes all of the kind of proof of stake parts of the Serenity release. So it does not include the sharding specific bits, which are in phases 1 and 2. And when we made that initial release, I think we mentioned that there's a couple of kind of features that we're still missing, where one of them was mandatory deposit ordering, and the other was a more efficient shuffling algorithm. And I think since the release that was either right after that or was just about to go out, that's also going to be included. So basically, phase 0 is kind of definitely well into refinement mode at this point, and challenges are starting to move into things like finalizing the wire protocol and testing and other things that are probably more even client implements or updates more than research updates at this point. I've been starting work on phase 1, which is basically sharding of data and not sharding of computation. And phase 1 from a specification point is actually very simple, or at least very simple given all of the work that's already been done on the phase 0 side. The one hard thing is that it basically involves specifying the full proof of custody game, which I've been still in the process of doing. And phase 2, which is basically state and execution, is something that I think we can and should be trying to do in parallel with phase 1. So I think we should definitely not kind of allow we should not fall into the mindset of thinking that phase 0 all gets done, then phase 1 gets done, then phase 2 gets done, without kind of doing a lot of work in parallel between them. Because if we don't parallelize, then things will really take until 2020, whenever the trolls are saying. But the nice thing is that phase 1 is primarily, as I mentioned in one of the previous calls, phase 1 is primarily a P2P network implementation challenge, and phase 2 is largely very significantly a specification challenge. So there's a huge amount of opportunity for doing them in parallel, and I would argue the time to start having real discussions on concretifying what phase 2 is going to look like in kind of even the fine details is basically now. So I've been starting to reach out to 1.x people more on some things, and it's also been put up an ETH research post that's talking about cross-shard transactions. One interesting thing that's worth getting a lot of people's input is basically what would a kind of dream replacement for ERC20 look like that would be done on top of phase 2, both because it's just something that a lot of people obviously want, but it's also a kind of just quick test of whether how kind of easy it is to build things that are actually interesting and useful on top of whatever the phase 2 is that we end up building. So I'm kind of in parallel to doing the phase 1 stuff, I'm probably going to continue pushing hard on all of those things, but I do kind of hope to get feedback from a lot of people, and especially people here, because this is the area where we do need a lot of experience, a lot of input from people who have experience with actually trying to build and deploy things on top of the current platform, so we know we can kind of figure out what the wish list is and figure out what the best way is to address as much of it as we can, while still being kind of reasonably minimal and not kind of kitchen sinky.
I may have misheard, but why would it be trolling to expect phase 2 to be done about 2021? It's only about 2 years
I said to 2020 whatever, and there's definitely trolls saying way past 2021. But I think even 2021 is honestly not the date we should be shooting for at all, because basically because the thing with phase 2 is like based in terms of specification, right? Specification of phase 2 like basically needs to start today. Is what I'm trying to say here. Like it's not something that like because we know that phase 2 has large specification challenges to it, that and phase 1 is kind of relatively heavy on implementation versus or of peer-to-peer network stuff versus specification, whereas phase 2 is relatively light on that, and it's heavier on these other complexities. So it's essentially in our hands to try to kind of work together and make phase 2 things not have delays that are unnecessary.
Cool. Any questions or comments on that? Anybody else? Okay. And I think Danny posted a link to the Phase 2 pre-spec cross-sharding mechanism document in Ethmagicians in the Zoom chat if y'all want to go look at that. I think that's the last thing. Awesome. Wow, we're early today. Yay.
Do we have a critical path analysis to say whether these tasks can be done in parallel?
Which tasks are we talking about here?
You're wanting to run some phases of development in parallel, and it takes a critical path analysis to know whether that's actually possible.
Specifically,
well, I pretty much laid out what the argument is, right?
Oh, go ahead, Danny.
What sort of formal analysis that you want to see? I don't think that we have that, but the state execution on top of having consensus on data is independent of having consensus on data. The way that accounts exist and are deployed in execution and the WASM, the subset of WASM that is used, is independent of how you come to consensus on the data underneath it. And so the specification and the design space for phase 2 is pretty wide, and we should certainly be specifying and narrowing down that design space. Whether you can build phase 2 without having the phase 1 bones underneath, I think is not quite the question right now. It's really whether you can begin to specify and narrow down and come to decisions, because there's a lot of decisions to make with phase 2.
Okay, thanks.
And I had no idea what a critical path analysis was, so I posted it in the Zoom chat. It's actually pretty interesting, and there's a cool graph on there, so check it out.
Yeah, it's like a 50-year-old engineering technique. I don't think it's ever been superseded because it's almost physics.
Cool. All right. Anybody else have comments or any other items that were off the agenda?
Yeah, just one more plea for everyone listening to take personal action about the redeployability of contracts in post-Constantinople, just to help educate your networks about the redeployability, and specifically this idea that someone can carefully craft a contract that looks reasonable to people who are in a pre-Constantinople mindset, but definitely malicious afterwards. That's it.
I'd also add that in at least the current kind of vague and nebulous set of proposals for phase 2, create 2 is the only kind of creation opcode. So that makes this kind of issue of basically helping people navigate their way around how create 2 based contract systems work even more important.
Cool. Anything else, anybody? All right, we're half an hour early. Yay. Everybody have a great day or night, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye.
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 Bye. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.